So I'm just going to share a few things with you, but just before I get moving on that, to say that the journey that I've made to what I'm doing now, which ranges from working with Unilever and Danone and other organizations, that kind, to groups of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds in nature, working with people my age and any time past retirement, I think they call it, inviting them to step back in and lend their gifts and experience to our world. In other words, bringing the elders in from the outside and bring them back. All kinds of groups, people in going to prison or just come out of prison, ex-veterans, anyone, the police, anyone really I can get to listen, basically. And but this journey began from a place as a teenager of standing at the doorway of my home, looking down the street on right and left, and looking at observing the lives of all our neighbors and thinking, I cannot believe that I have been born at such an incredibly boring time. Everything is predictable. Everywhere's been discovered. There are no adventures anymore. As far as I can see, what it means to be an adult now is you're a good boy, good girl, whatever. You pass your exams, you go to college, university, you do the best you can, then you get what they call a good job, and then you put your head down and do what somebody else wants you to do for the next few decades, and then you leave and go on cruises. And then one day you just fall over and die, and that was your life. And at that point, I just thought, I'm not going to do it. So I went AWOL for about 10 years, got a lot of trouble, and ended up in a squat in southeast London with some guy holding a loaded revolver to my head. And I had two thoughts at that moment of time. And one was, wow, like, this is exciting. This is really amazing. I know who's in the room. I know who's dangerous. I know who to watch. I know where the exits are. I know I'm alive and I intend to stay alive. And it's got many of the hallmarks of the excitement that I longed for. And the other voice was saying, this is pathetic. It's a silly little drama that's being acted out. It has no meaning. It's a substitute for a real life. It's because it felt to me that there was nothing to be done and it was so boring that I went and created my own little drama to fill the emptiness that I feel. Because deep down, I long to serve the things that I truly love. So, and what were those things? Well, my next birthday, I'm 70. I was born in 1949. And it was a time in Britain when, if you lived out of the city or on the edges of a city, you know, my mum used to open the door. Our 3 boys would just run out the door, and we would not be back until dinner time. And we would live in the imaginal world of our adventures. You know, we would be completely transported in this joyful, wonderful, rich world of our creativity in a way. Everything to do with trees and rivers and streams and hills and the smell of grass and the passing of seasons, the moon cycle, all these things were utterly, I fell in love with those things. And after leaving childhood was the feeling that these were childish things and that now I had to grow up. So what really happened was a refusal to grow up. If that's what it means, the price is too high. And that's why I rebelled. So after I managed to get out of that room alive, I went up to as far away as I could from London and the company I've been keeping, and I trained as a gardener. Because at least I'll be outside and tending plants and things. And my first job was head gardener in a leadership development center for corporate executives. And one day I witnessed a fight between two Sainsbury's executives where, you know, they literally, I remember looking at this because it was a leadership training exercise. And I remember observing this fight and thinking, well, this is very interesting. I guess this is what you do in leadership development. You know, you irritate everybody to the point of no return, and then somebody lashes out, and then you make a sort of some cunning intervention and get people to shake out the learning from the experience. And I looked across at the facilitator and I realized that he had no idea what to do, was hopelessly out of his depth. And at that point, I thought, well, it looks a bit like the world I've just come from, so I think I'll step in. A different kind of garden, you know. And I did, and overnight I became a management consultant because it went very well. So they said, would you like to be a management consultant? I said, yes, I don't know what that means really, but I'm up for it. So I left the garden and became management consultant. 3 years later, I was the head of consultancy. Then I set up my leadership company in the UK, then Poland, then Russia. Until one client one day made a fortune, sold his company to Warren Buffett and said to me, I want to thank you for everything you've done to help me in my business. Do you have a dream? And I said, yes, I do. It's a valley where we would meet all people from all walks of life and inquire what it really truly means to be human. Because it feels to me we have hopelessly lost our way, really, with this human story. And he said, what do you need? And I said, I need the valley. And he pulled out his checkbook and he wrote a check that bought 50 acres of Devon, handed it to me and said, well, now you can live your dream. And it's continued like this ever since, really. Linked with this was the feeling that I had never received the education that I wished to receive. I'd never been taught about the things that I really love, the things that I feel important. And I asked myself, who on this earth has the knowledge that I desire? And the answer to that, I felt, was indigenous people. So I went off at the same time that I became this gardener. And after 3 years searching, found this group of Native American people who were willing to teach me about our earth and her people and all things of that kind. And it's been interesting because you've been speaking about anger, Margaret, and love and these things. And I knew that love for me it's not a fluffy little thing. It's a fierce, pulsing, powerful, you know, it has the sound of drums beating and feet stamping on the ground, you know, of the whole surge of a circle of people that run together. And it has some images of battlefields. It has some images of migration and people traveling. It has all sorts of thrilling, exciting images for me. And it has the sound of ancient songs and chants lifting up to the sky as a feeling when we were alive in a way that I feel it's difficult to find now. Certainly I didn't notice when I looked down the street and noticed all the pretty little lawns and the pretty little flower beds and the pretty little marriages and the pretty little cars and all the pretty little things that I found so incredibly upsetting, really. And those people taught me and introduced me to many what I feel to be wondrous things. And a lot of that has to do with, I believe, what all of us are engaged in, which is, in our own way, seeking to make a difference and turn the current story of humanity, because it feels to me we are racing towards the edge of a cliff, of destroying our natural environment, of heaving all the money into a very small little group of people who have it all and many others little, of the pollution of our soils, our water, and all these things, and all the things that divide us and split us and separate us. When so many of us know that this is not actually how we wish to live or to be. So when we think about leadership, ask yourselves, how would we define what a leader is? And my people, we define it as someone who is brave enough to act on what they know to be true. So it's not an academic definition, but we'd say a leader is someone who is brave enough to act, to take action on what they know to be true. Now, I say it's not an academic one because I'm sure some of the worst tyrants in this world have acted on what they knew to be true. But you understand what it means to be guided by your own conscience, by your your innate knowledge of what is true and good and kind and beautiful. We say a leader is any person of profound integrity who embodies that integrity in small and big day-to-day actions. Because to be a person of profound integrity, and by the way, I'm not claiming that for myself, but to be a person of profound integrity is a rare thing. And when I think you meet someone of profound integrity, they cannot help, though they might have no desire to be a leader, they will be a leader. Because people will gravitate to them, because they will trust them, because they will feel something about this person that has substance and weight. And they will automatically look to that person for something that will help them feel better in this life. We say that leadership is a choice. And I came to that after many years of coaching and facilitating in leadership. And there are many different theories about what makes leaders, whether it's the innate qualities that you have from when you were born as a child, whether it can be learned through different things, but we think we call it just a choice. A choice that you make when you care enough about something to do something about it. And it's not a choice that's made once. It's a choice that's made almost every second, constantly, forever. Because we will, all of us, have met people who did something wonderful some long time ago. A brave choice, let's say. And since then have stopped innovating. And now actually they still live on what they used to do, what they once did, but they're no longer present and as it were, leaning into what is happening now. Leadership is a choice that you make when you care enough about something to decide to inconvenience yourself by getting down and doing something about it. Who can be leaders? Well, there's a woman in a supermarket near me we go to sometimes, and she's at the checkout till. So it's on one level you could say it's not a great job, it's pretty poor pay. There is nothing about her. She will never adorn the cover of a beauty magazine, okay? She's probably around about 60 years old. You look at her and you feel that she has walked her way through many tough experiences. She has a slight twitch in one eye and, various things of this kind. And it would be hard to ever find a kinder, more generous, heart-opened human being. Every person that arrives at her checkout, she engages with them. She opens herself, as it were, in her generous humanity to them. The children, she always immediately relates with them. Everything about her speaks of a sort of dignity and authority, a kindness, and a humanity, if you like. So I would name her a leader. There are people in almost every, I suppose I'm just trying to say that they exist everywhere. Now, in many of the people that work with me, or that I come across in my work, particularly in the activists and the the alternative community, if you like, who are sort of not in the mainstream of society, will refer to people in the corporate world, in a particular way, and like they like to use this phrase, suits, the suits are doing this, or, let's, whatever. But when I was with Danone in Colorado last week, I don't know how many of you know about B Corps, B Corp movement. If you don't, really, please Google them, just letter B, Corp. A legal framework around which organizations can constitute themselves, and it's radical. It's, for my money, one of the most exciting things that's happening in the whole world of business at the moment. Most B Corps are small companies because it's very, very hard to become a B Corp. And even once you become one, it's very, very hard to remain being a B Corp. Basically, it is like almost fair trade is to products, a B Corp is to organizations. But except I'd say it's a lot more challenging. It would be hard to find a more passionate, dedicated group of people trying to do something good for this earth than the management team of Danone North America, okay, who are all corporate people. I attended that meeting, and at the very end I just expressed, I said, I knew it would be interesting, but I had no idea that I would leave feeling inspired. The work that they're doing now, pumping money and effort into regenerative agriculture, exploring the ways in which a slight tweak into farming techniques could sequester huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, setting incredibly challenging goals for all of their packaging to not pollute in any way and not to contribute in any way to global warming. It goes on and on and on and on. So that what I'm trying to say again is that they exist everywhere. So this whole notion of them and us feels to me like whether it's in us, or whether it was a story given to us at some point, but it is terrifying how we are doing this. We have in our land, we had 2 little villages of like yurts, and we put 2 villages on either side of a hill, because my experience within working in leadership development is if you take a group of people from the same floor in the same business who've known each other for years, and you put them into 2 different locations with a hill in between, within hours the people in this place will start talking about the other people who live over there as if they're different. They'll start cozying up together and saying, telling stories about the other people. The villages around where I live do exactly the same. The village of Cristo has a belief about the people who live in Higher Ashton. The Higher Ashton people have a view about the people who live in the other village, and so on and so forth. This is the time, or if ever there was a time, when we are invited to courageous action. And that courageousness, really following on from what we were this morning's session, is not just courage going outwards to what we're doing, but it is the courageous inner journey that we are being invited on as well. So those Native Americans spoke to me about the twin trail of leadership. They said, we would never trust any leader who is not walking both trails simultaneously. The inner trail of your own self-unfolding, self-healing, self-deepening, self-becoming, and the outer trail of having powerful effect in the world. And they said, we reject this notion that you go up the mountain, get enlightened, then come down and do something. Because we have noticed that many people could spend a decade up the mountain alone, feel enlightened, come back, the moment they get a family and kids who are late for school and get tired and stressed, they're suddenly not quite as enlightened as they were before. So he said, we think you have to do both these things simultaneously. And what's more, do not imagine that you will ever be ready, because you'll never be ready. You'll never be ready, and you'll never have enough resources. It'll always feel like, well, if I just had a bit more knowledge or a bit more money, or, if I'd been born on the other side of town or spoken a different way, or if I, all these, it's hopeless, it's pointless. Just begin. Start and learn and grow and acquire and all these things, but do not wait to be ready. Otherwise, you know, time will just sort of wash by. I've had the privilege of meeting some extraordinary people with extraordinary stories. One of them was a colleague of Nelson Mandela, a guy called Mac Maharaj. And I took a group of 10 of these senior execs to go and meet him. And Mac Maharaj was the leader of the ANC forces on the ground in the bush during the apartheid regime, and witnessed and saw and gave commands, as it were, that led to people losing their lives, being tortured, terrible things happening, you know, real leadership at that kind of hard edge. And when we gathered to meet him, we had our questions, and one of those questions is, in all the time that you have been a leader and in such extreme circumstances, what have you learned, what have you come to believe is the most important quality that somebody carrying a lot of responsibility needs as an attribute of leadership? And he paused a bit and then he said, well, first of all, I'm going to ask you that question, but remain silent with your answers. So even now I could ask you, have a little think. If you had a deputy, let's say, a very senior level, and you were looking for that person to have one particular attribute, what would it be? So after a pause, he then answered the question. He said, for me, he said, the most important attribute that I look for in a leader carrying a lot of responsibility, he said, is self. And everybody's self, and everybody around there thought he was going to say self-confidence. He said self-doubt. Self-doubt. And they said, yes, we are. He said, I am sick to death of leaders who only have certainty. Leaders who have no questions. Leaders who have the assumption that the ground they stand on, that whatever will come out of their mouth is the right thing to do. He said, a leader is not wrestling with not knowing, is a leader that I couldn't trust. He said, of course you need a measure of self-confidence. And of course you don't need so much self-doubt that you're incapable of moving. But he said, we are suffering now under the situation caused by so many leaders with no self-doubt, who just drag us and hurl us into situations with no capacity to question, to discern, no willingness to listen. Because and the whole basis of leadership is the willingness, really, to engage, to relate, to listen, to draw in, and of course, ultimately, to find ways to decisions and action. It meant a lot to me. We all know this appallingly distorted picture that we've developed around leadership, which is largely masculine, of course, and has this sort of ridiculous caricature of these people who are immensely strong and know what to do and very decisive and all these things. When we also know, since we've lived lives, that many times when you meet that, it is a defense that's been erected by someone that's frightened and that is, has all kinds of uncertainties and fears, or is just bolstered up by a story. It's a lot of pretense in it. So the kind of leadership we're speaking about surely must be one when, of all the things that we're truly looking for, we want humanity. We want them a willingness to say when they've made mistakes, a willingness, a vulnerability and an openness that is risks being real, because without that we've got nothing, If there was ever a time, it's distressing when we listen to all the debates that have been happening in this country over the last, I was going to say months, but I think it's years now, isn't it? Around Brexit, for instance, but even if it wasn't Brexit, it would be anything. Have I ever heard in a debate somebody say, wow, that's a really good point. I haven't thought of that. Yes, I think you're right. Never, ever, ever, ever have I ever heard that. So it feels like debate. Actually, in many ways, I'm very not unsure to what extent debate is particularly helpful at all. In our place, we sometimes take a council like this, and we will introduce a question, and then we go around the circle. And you cannot speak when you want to speak. It's always just the next person. And we introduce a topic, and it's quite a controversial topic. And each person speaks. And you will notice that in the first round, people speak their ready-made opinions. And that's fine. But as it continues around, you can begin to feel less certainty because they've been obliged to listen. And then we take it round again. The same question goes round again. And now suddenly everyone's speaking in a different way because they're saying things like, well, you know, and they begin to express the thoughts which show that I hadn't actually thought of these different points that were raised. I'm suddenly feeling less certain that I know quite what my position is. And then there's a willingness for it to continue. And gradually we get to something which is a little more real.
Could we lend you to Parliament? Could we lend you to Parliament so you do that with them? Both parties, they love it.
There are 3 questions that I would like to offer you, okay, that I think are questions for a leader. What is it that you most deeply and profoundly, and that's very important, those 2 words, deeply and profoundly love? Now I want you to remember, I'm not talking about, as it were, when I say soft, fluffy, there's nothing wrong with soft, and there's actually nothing wrong with fluffy if it's to do with pillows, but I'm talking about fiercely love, passionately love, profoundly love. What is it you most deeply and profoundly love? Now let me just say a bit here. At one point, working with a team from Procter & Gamble, I was working with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and we were trying to persuade this very high-performing team within Procter & Gamble to take on the sustainability agenda and drive sustainability. We needed it to be done by a high-performance team so that others would look at what they were doing. 3 days of rational argument, presentations, evidence-based material had not made any difference at all. They were bored, they were fed up, they wanted to go back to making money, and they were just waiting for it to finish. And in the last few hours that we had, I said to the team, I said, would you let me try something out? I said, it may just make matters worse, but I think it's worth a shot. So they said, okay. So I got them exactly like us now. And I said, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to promise me before you know the question that you will answer it with the utmost authenticity and courage that you can possibly summon. Are you willing to go with me? Now, they were all people who are selling stuff, okay? They like being challenged like this. So, of course, they all say, yes, 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 yes. You know, we will, yes. You know, give us your worst, you know, whatever. What is it that you most deeply and profoundly love? And then they're all, ooh. And I looked around the circle and I saw someone, I think this person will courageously speak to this question. I hope they do, because this person will set the tone. And I said, would you begin? And he spoke, and he did. He did amazing from his heart, deeply and profoundly loves. The 3rd person in, we got the first tears. The next person was the finance director, who confessed that he loved yoga and meditated and all these things. The first time anybody knew about it. Halfway through the meeting, we had to stop the meeting because there was so much emotion and tears. And I had the head of HR on my shoulder, who's just a cascade of tears. saying that she hated this job, she didn't want it anyway, and she'd always want to do something else. Saying, please don't let them see me. And I said, it's fine, you just cry, it's okay, you'll be all right. Then we convene again, and we carry on. And at the end, what did they talk about? They talked about their children, their children, grandchildren. They talked about their brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, partners, husbands, wives, whatever. They talked about beautiful places in nature. They talked about moments of exquisite tenderness when they sat together and maybe shared something very, very personal. They talked about all the things that cross cultures we love. And I said, you know, we've spent 3 days trying to persuade you to take sustainability into your thing. And you have just named all those things: community, environment, you know, safety. You've named them all. And you totally rejected it. And now you've just said that this is what you love. I said, why? In your professional careers, would you not devote your experience, ingenuity, creativity, etc., towards what you love? And at that point, they agreed to take on this project, and they took it on. And I don't know the end of that story, because I wasn't there after that. Whatever you deeply and profoundly love, and I think that's a question, you see, that rolls on through the whole of your life, you are, in a sense, defining what is sacred to you. And what you would do anything to protect, to stand for. To betray what you deeply and profoundly love would be to betray the very core of who you are. But you know, when I work with people, the answer from many, many people to that question, the answer is I never have. I never have deeply and profoundly loved. Because we are never, you know, even from our, I don't know, obviously you come from different countries, but in our schools at least, our little children are not taught what they deeply and profoundly love. They're pushed to pass the next exam. Our young people in our secondary schools are not, it does not exist on any university curriculum, and it doesn't exist in our businesses and careers. But is it not a question we should be asking? The second question is, what are your deepest and most profound gifts? Many people know what they're qualified in. Many people know what they're experienced in. Very few people have the sense that they have a gift. And very few people, even if they have a sense that they might have one, know what it is. From the indigenous people that I work with, they said when creation, as it were, allows the birth of a new child, whispered in this unborn child's ear, is a little piece of creation's genius is planted inside that little being, and whispered in their ear is, find your gift, grow it, bring it to potential, and share it. I just love the idea of it. So I don't even know that it matters too much to believe that you have a gift, but I think it's a wonderful hypothesis upon which to assume I have a gift, you know. And if I could just say now, you know, I found my gift very late in life, you know, and my gift is really around the sort of thing that I'm doing now. And the thing about your gift is that you cannot help but be successful. And you will feel joyful. And you'll feel peaceful. Because you're working from that place in you that is yours to truly give. Does that make sense? So if your work is located around something other than your gift, there will always be this slight tension that's operating. And last one, what are your deepest and most profound responsibilities? And again, in our culture, we have defined that so narrowly. So I will end up saying my children, my little family, and that's it. I maybe expand it out a little bit, but I don't expand it as far as the people of Yemen. I don't expand it as far as children who are outside of my sphere. I do not, in fact, this question of, which I have asked in various events, of do you love your children? And on one occasion, it got an absolute tidal wave of abuse from the audience saying, how dare you ask us if we love our children? That's the most outrageous thing that's ever been said to us. Of course, we love our children. And I came back and said then, how come so many of you are engaged in businesses and activities which are undermining the future that those same children will inhabit? Do you call that love? I didn't get invited back. So I'm sure I must be running out of time soon, so I'm just going to add this last bit. And last bit, this book of mine, which you'll receive a copy of, is called The Children's Fire. And it comes from indigenous wisdom teaching that said when one particular group of people, and they came round as tribal chiefs, and they were asking themselves the question, how shall we govern our people? How do we be the best leaders that we can be? And when they sat with that question, they knew that very, very often, perhaps even more often than not, when a group of leaders come together and have either been elected or selected into that role, many of them with the best of intentions, they will make choices and decisions which serve their people, but over a period of time, begin to make choices and decisions that serve the community of leaders and not those whom they are leading. So they said, how should we deal with this? And they came up with this idea. We will, every time we gather in council, we'll have a little fire in the center of our council of chiefs. Let's imagine you are all chiefs in that council. And no chief will be allowed to take his or her seat without making a pledge to the children's fire. No law, no decision, no action, nothing of any kind will be permitted to go out from this council of chiefs that will harm the children. And later from the Iroquois Confederation came this idea of 7 generations to come. No law, no decision, no action, nothing of any kind will be permitted to go out from this circle of chiefs that will harm the children. And I was asked to imagine, can you imagine what would happen if in our churches, our universities and schools, in our governments, in all institutions of power, the leaders of those places were obliged to make that pledge, what the impact would be. And what kind of society is it that would not take the children's pledge? And the answer to that, I have to say, is pretty frightening, because it's an insane society. It's a society that perhaps no longer wishes to live. Chief Oren Lyons of the Iroquois said their people have a prophecy. They say that when the weather goes crazy and the people cease to love their children, will be the final confrontation between humanity as a species and our Mother Earth, as it were. And they believe that time has now come. So lastly, I'd say you are chiefs, you see. You're not chiefs because you wish to be chiefs. You're chiefs because you care and that you're doing something about it. And it doesn't matter that we are not all doing the same thing. It's wonderful that we're not all doing the same thing. That we're all going to the things that particularly relate to us and our feelings. That's how it should be. And if we all do that, we'll cover all the spaces. And some of us will work with, people on the outside of society. Some of us work on the inside. Some will work with water. Some will work with agriculture. Some will work just everything. It's a wonderful feeling. There is something else I wanted to say about hope. Can we say it? there are many people who I engage with, who are moving towards the edge of hope. Many of the environmentalists and people involved in climate change that I meet are saying, we are not sure if this is reversible now. This is a big thing. If our hope and willingness to stand depends on there being a happy ending to this story, then the assault of negative news that will come over the coming years, I believe, will gradually weaken us and make us less able to do what we should be doing. So I'd say that kind of hope is a very fragile platform to stand on. So when people say to me, do you honestly believe, Matt, that what you're doing with your little valley on the edge of Devon and your occasional other things is going to make any kind of difference at all? I say, I have no idea. But it's not a question I worry myself about. I say, I will do everything I can that's within my power to use the gifts that I've got, the experience I've got, towards the things that I think truly matter. And even if, whether that leads to a happy outcome or a bad outcome, it's not conditional upon that, because I would do it whatever. Even if I knew that the worst outcomes, I would still do it, because this is how I wish to live my life. So it is very important for us, I believe, to be finding whatever way we can, that the ground we stand on is as solid and powerful and strong as we can, so that we can endure as the waves of change which are already with us and will continue to rise, wash around our feet or go over our head. Because that is the joy of being alive, serving a purpose that is rather greater than simply looking after me. See them? Thank you.
We still have some time before you need to leave. It's okay for continued conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So just to double check, you said there's 3 questions, and in the third one, what is your deepest responsibility?
Deepest and most profound responsibilities, yes. If I can just say a little bit on that, I, at my rather older age, I suddenly got a tiny little baby boy, right? So he's 22 months old. My wife, who is Kenyan, my little boy, and my son by marriage, whose dad died when he was 2 and is 20 now. Obviously I deeply love them. I have a commitment to them, so they are a responsibility. But that does not mean that I don't have other responsibilities. And so it's not easy. I've been away from home a lot this last month. So it is a constant trying to ride this thing, because it is absolutely important to me that my wife and my 2 boys, one 22 months, one 20 years, know that they are loved and that I am committed with them. At the same time, I have a lot of other things which constitute my responsibilities. I think many of us, in the desire to simplify our worlds, will just contract it to one thing. Our work, let's say, at the expense of our families, or our family at the expense of our work, or whatever it happens to be. So it's worth some consideration, what you consider to be your responsibilities. Another would be talents that you have, but you're frightened to develop them. Well, of course you are. It's always frightening, isn't it? Public speaking is the biggest part of what I do, and I was terrified. I used to get panic attacks. Awful, awful. It was so frightening for me. I could run a course, a program, when it was about other topic. But to really speak from the heart and the things that matter to me, it was very frightening. So I just thought, well, how can I possibly not do it? I have to do it. So now it's just a question of how I chart my way into it. So I began doing that. I just started with speaking at music festivals, often on the first occasion to an audience free, and I just gradually built up. And I also engaged someone to work with me to help me unravel some of the unresolved knots of my own childhood thing that would help me, free me, to be able to do that work. So in other words, this is part of that twin trail, your inner path. Yeah.
Maybe a personal question, but what's the most important lesson that you aim to teach your children?
A lesson to teach them. All right, well, I'm not sure if it's a lesson to teach. I would like, my older boy, it's almost past that point now, a little one. I'd like him to grow up feeling good about himself. I would say that if our education system, our teachers in schools said our absolute determination is that every child leaving this school will feel good about who they are, we would watch the crime rate, as it were, just plummet. It's very dangerous that young people should be leaving our schools feeling bad about who they are, that they have nothing to give, that they have no value. It is a terrifying thing, and many, of course, then extremely angry about that, begin to act it out in all kinds of different ways. So that would be one. I mean, I could go on probably, but that would be a simple one that I would offer.
For me, the way I hear it is, if you knew you would fail, would you do it anyway?
Yes.
And how can that idea be embedded in the innovation process, the personal innovation process of living? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Confronted with, as it were, failing. You see, this is where, for me, the love thing comes in so important. I used to live in a narrowboat in London for 15 years. I always used to look at the ones who are free and roaming and wish I was doing that, but that was very important for me because I was my narrowboat had a little wood stove and all that, and I could chop wood and I do all the things I love doing, and that would help me. But I moved to the country. Now I go to the city and I work and that, but I go back. Every morning when I go to my cabin where I work, where I write and work, the first thing I do, I open the door, I go to the bird food, I scoop out a handful, I hold it out, and my little robin friend comes and lands on my hand and eats his food. I'm very clear who the beneficiary of this is. He gets some food, which he's keen on, but I get this massive hit that I am trusted from this little being. And then he, as he takes off, which, as you know smudging? When you smudge someone, and the indigenous thing, you waft smoke around them and you are, as it were, cleansing them. And in many ways, it's already still in many religions in different forms. Well, the little bird goes, and I just feel the little wing beats of air wash around me, and I just feel I'm ready to go now. So I look for those tiny moments of connection. The whole word, the theme of connection, you see, is so important. We are an utterly disconnected people now, living in the societies we live. Next year, I hope to go and visit some tribe of San Bushmen in Namibia and spend time with them. It's so extraordinary. How do these people know where the animals that they're hunting are? Because they don't wander around hoping they'll bump into them. They know where they are. How is that possible? the Aboriginal elder who came to Embercombe and used to say to me, that used to taught us about when they were all kids in school, and they used to know things that were going to happen before they happened. It was normal. It was not considered any big deal. Everybody knew it. It was just a way of... So they always knew the women would start cooking the food, lighting the fires, before the hunters arrived. Just at the right time that it all be ready for cooking, when they would appear over the horizon. How did they know? They knew because they are deeply nature connected, because they feel things. Another wonderful story, a friend of mine called John Young, who's a tracker, spoke when he was with the San Bushmen, and they went miles way outside the Bushman normal hunting territory, all over the place, jogging the whole day long, everywhere. And John got really worried because he had to get back to camp that night in order to catch a plane back. So at some point he stopped the group and he said, guys, you know, just sort of like, we've been running for miles in all kinds of different directions. You know, he said, I don't think any of us have been really noticing where we've been going. You know, how are we going to find our way home? And they all looked at each other and they had a little conference together and they were clearly very concerned for him. And they all eventually turned around and said, but John, don't you feel the tug of home? He said, well, I don't understand. He said, don't you feel the tug? Can't you feel home? I said, no. And he said, oh my God, you know, they're so worried for him. Don't worry, he said, we do. And at that point, they all swung like that and ran. And they were home in 3 hours. We, for thousands of years, have been connected. Nature is our real true home. I look for anything I can that will keep me connected in that way. Whether it's simply noticing the trees in the city as I go by, lifting my eyes to the stars, noticing the pattern of the moon. These things are beautiful, aren't they? You know, and they're all around us. That's what I do.
I've been very moved by that. I'm careful not to cough though. But what you said about connecting to small moments, I think, you know, the program I run is about inspiring kids with local heroes, normal, everyday people, instead of just, you know, the unattainable Beckhams and Kardashians that may not be all that healthy for our kids. They're one aspect of life, but there are many wonderful myriad of life. And I just thought what you said about those moments when you're with the bird for a moment, when you look up at the beautiful tree or something, that's the way we can reconnect our children, not through these, did I get 20 likes today? They're building themselves from the outside in. But the happiest people that we've been working with over 18 years, hundreds of them, the people on the happiness level are built from the inside out because they, as you say, get their triggers, their orientation from a sense of wonderment, as you're saying, connecting to nature around them. And, you know, we worked in Hong Kong for a while and many kids live in high-rise. They go from high-rise to concrete and then back to high-rise in their schools. And they actually think food just comes from supermarkets. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of disconnect, and the more disconnected they seem to be, the more unhappy and the more sort of cocooning they are. Whereas that connectivity to nature is so open. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mac. I think it's more of a comment, really. I've been to Embercombe 4 times now, and it was interesting this morning when you told us to think about something that we truly loved, because I always just imagined, for me, my happy place is standing on the mound and looking out over the valley, and there's the 2 yurt villages on each side. And probably in total I've spent 2 weeks at this place, but I've never... I think I'd been searching for community in so many different means, through my religion, through political activism, through partying, through, you know, trying to find that community, and arriving at Embercombe and I would really recommend spending time there for, for anyone, but arriving there and doing a course just for 5 days and having everybody meet you with their hearts open. There's just like no place like it. So I just really wanted to say thank you for creating it. Yeah, like setting so many of us on that path, I think.
Thank
And everybody go.
Appreciate it. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I learned a lot about leadership. I've got a question, really a comment about. I think what you were saying about the kind of leadership who has got self-doubt, and I think I am that kind of leader, and I agree with that, and that you need to remain teachable, coachable, open to learning as a leader. And I believe that the day I stop learning, that's the day I'll die. That's what I just wanted to comment. It really resonated with what I've always believed to be true. And the next question I wanted to ask you is, how do you find these tribes?
It's a very, I have to try and think of a really short version. I mean, we were a bunch of young men who were all searching, really, and we heard that there was a group of Native Americans moving around Britain, visiting some of our ancient sacred sites. We were fascinated by this. We went off trying to find them. It was the days before internet and stuff. And we almost caught up with them, but we didn't. Then they went. Next summer, we heard they were back. Now we really hunted them, and we failed. Next year, they came back. Now I'm completely possessed. I have to find these people. And we finally caught up with them. And I just met them, and I said, in my guts, I know you hold knowledge that I wish to learn. Will you teach me? And to which they answered basically, we don't know, because first we have to find out who you are and whether you can sustain and whether you are really dedicated. And so a year later, they invited me to their land and they tested me. I could go on for hours about what that looked like, but it wasn't easy. But the testing really was about how much I loved life and how willing I was to serve the needs and interests of the young and unborn. But by the way, the Children's Fire is not just about human children. It's about the young of all kind, which really, when you think what the young represent renewal, they represent vitality, they are our collective hopes and investment. So really, it's a pledge to life. And the wonderful thing about it is, you know, I will never let go of that pledge, you know. So even though we're living at this incredibly difficult time, I lead a very joyful life because I'm in love with life, you know. I find a lot of it very funny. So I think I think there's evidence that I'm still sane is that I feel the weight of a deep grief on one side with the pain of so much that's happening, and I feel the immense privilege of having a life on this earth for a few years and the joy of that. And I think, so moving between tears and laughter feels to me a fairly rational response to life. What is so frightening is the millions who, as it were, have no feeling. Not because they're bad people or whatever, they're just cut off from it. So they're neither happy nor sad, they're neither angry or anything, they're just moving along. Yeah.
I have a question. This is a bit future casting oriented, but I came across a report recently and it was mentioning urbanization. You can forecast. So 100 years ago, 14%, this was the data, the statistic, of humanity lived in cities. So the majority did not. They were more connected in rural environments. And then by 2050, it's forecasted that almost 80% of humanity will be living in urban environments, which without intentional urban design, integrating nature, et cetera, we could possibly be perpetuating a lot of the challenges that we see currently, which is a lot of concrete jungle and disconnect. What are your thoughts on what needs to happen at maybe either a citizen level or policy level, or what are those conversations that are being had that are thinking that forward, or maybe they're not yet?
Well, just clearly, you know, we have the capacity, the cleverness, we could say, to do almost anything. What is such a tragedy is that wisdom has not caught up with our cleverness, you know. So we could design cities that are beautiful places and safe places to live, and that grow food and all these things. We could do that. I think it depends so much on the will. There are people working on this, of course, as on every area. There are amazing solutions being developed all over the place. Some of those solutions are being deliberately held back or placed in locked doors because it doesn't serve the interests of whoever that they be activated. So where does the change need to come from? I would say to say everywhere. You know, part of the whole, I was saying to a couple of you earlier, we feel that the greatest danger that the Earth faces at this time is not climate change or anything, it's the passivity of ordinary good people who stand on the sidelines and sympathize and maybe buy something slightly different on the shelves, but essentially do nothing. Nothing anywhere near what they're capable of doing if they were really activated. So I celebrate those who are peaceful activists on the front line trying to make change. I celebrate those who are trying to do it, like I was telling about Polly Higgins, the lawyer who's trying to bring a law of ecocide that would become a crime against humanity, that would mean that there is legal recourse to actions which threaten, you know, vast things. I celebrate those teachers that are trying their utmost, and educators, to change the framing of education and how we meet our young. The business people who are trying to do that. So I think it's going to have to come from every direction, but if we're at volume 3 now, we need to volume 10, you know. There needs to be, but how, a question that I do not feel is, I go to conferences and speak, and many times I recognize the people in the conference, some of them. How do we get out to those huge numbers of people who are only fractionally aware? And I don't really know. All I know is that we've got to, that's an area of innovation, how we really scale, bringing in all sections of society so that we can all gather together around the children's fire and not just the few.
You just said that there is this mass of humanity who you believe sit on the sidelines, as you said. So do you think that these people, the sideline people, want to do something, don't know they want to do something, don't know how to do something? What do you think is the nature of that condition?
So obviously there will be a large proportion of those people who are in almost all effort they have is just simply to survive and do whatever. But there's another whole big chunk. And I would say that we have, and again, I'm not sure how it is in every culture, but I would say in Britain, we have come to believe that we're powerless, everybody is always saying, who, me? You know, what can I do? I'm just little me. I'm not particularly qualified, bright, intelligent, gifted, anything. I'm just little me. That's for talented, influential people. So I feel that that is a sort of slave mentality. It's a sort of, it emerges from our feudal system, this feeling of disempowerment of ordinary people, and that they are not somehow there, even their vote doesn't matter. That's my own feeling. And how we get past that? Well, I can think of long-term ways you get past that, but rapidly and quickly, I don't know. There are so many people who just feel disempowered and incapable of making any kind of difference, and that their difference, whatever they can do, doesn't really add up to anything. And that's how we get presidents and, you know, we get whatever, things happen. And also the danger of massive chunks of the population who don't just feel but have indeed been sidelined and left behind, who get angry. It's a little bit like, you know, who feel they have no value. That is pay a huge price for this.
Being mindful of time, especially your time, since you have an agenda of logistics ahead, we're going to have to start wrapping up, but we'd love to invite you to kind of close with that. If there was that one thing, which there's so many, I feel like we're all writing notes and capturing as much as we can to absorb your wisdom as well. What is the one message that you would want to leave with us today?
Yeah, okay. There's a quotation attributed to Helen Keller, but I think it was some guy called the Reverend Edward Hale, something like that. I am only one, and yet I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. I am only one, and yet I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And for most of us, the something that we can do, when we activate our love, our passion, our anger, that something is not insignificant. It's powerful, you know. It's been really lovely to spend time with you. I've really enjoyed listening and learning. Actually, it's been very thought-provoking. I've got a lot of things to think about as I journey back. But it's always so inspiring to me to come to these sort of gatherings and be with people who are doing to be amongst people and one of a circle of people that are trying to do things. I was completely wrong when I was a teenager. This is the most exciting, thrilling, amazing time to be alive. You know, a lot stands. So I'm pretty happy. I'm hoping to hang around for another 10 or 20 years. Check out and be part of it. Thank you very much indeed.
1 minute before we start clapping. Mark, I just want to say, I'm losing my voice. I mean, I'm deeply moved by your presentation today. I've lost my voice. It's been happening, it's coming on for the last couple of days. And I remember when I first found you, and I looked at your background, I was like, this is someone that I would like to embrace and bring into what we're doing, No Voice. I did tell you, get prepared for something odd in respect of how we engage with this issue of anger. And I would tell you that I was listening to you when you were speaking, and I said, I had some questions I wanted to ask you. And for me, do I do it in front of everyone? Or do I take the opportunity to do this personally? Because suppose Mac tells me I'm all wrong and I'm leading people in a way that's not right, even though it's something that I'm deeply convicted about. We've done research on. And I've decided I'm more committed to being a servant of truth and getting to where we need to get to as a collective than being right. So I do want to ask you something. I was struck when you were talking about the 3 questions that every leader should ask. We have an exercise right after this, so it's really crazy, where we integrate 3 things. And one is that which you profoundly love. The second thing is what you're good at, your skills, your giftings, your talents. And the third thing is what makes you angriest.
Right.
This is where we separated. And I thought about what you said about profound responsibility. And I thought, but isn't this what this anger thing is? Because if you remember the quote that Gandhi put up with Gandhi, when Gandhi said, anger is good, and it is an energy that tells us what is right from wrong. It's an energy that tells us what we are prepared to do more for, to take action about, what we care deeply for that is broken and that is lost. And for me, as I was hearing you, articulate those 3, and I thought of our process, I saw the integration immediately. And I really wanted to, I think this is the first time you heard the anger thing, and I want you all to know that Mac has agreed to be one of the expert mentors to help you guys get your stuff out into the world, and the personal leadership aspect. I mean, this is like wisdom, really great wisdom, and we're so grateful that you're here. So I want to take the opportunity to try to figure out something with you, whether you see that correlation, and is there any way maybe we could find a way, Chanel, to integrate that kind of framing to what we're doing. So do you get what I see when I think about how Gandhi conceived of anger and how that could be aligned with the responsibility question?
Yes, I do. I guess we all see this through the frame of our own life experience, but I have been angry at times. I still get angry at times, and I don't try not to be angry. I feel it's part of who I am. And one of the things I loved about those Native Americans, they welcomed all of me, not just the peaceful me, But I do know, for instance, that in India, sat at a dining table with some guy who didn't like what I was saying. I became angry and I got locked into an argument with him. And gradually everybody else disappeared. And in the end, it was just the 2 of us. And we walked away, and I had this really sick feeling in my belly. I thought, if I had said to him, wow, that's really interesting. Why do you have the view? Why do you think the way you do? And if I'd been interested in him, whereas my anger just made me want to butt against him, And so that's why I feel like it depends how we define love. So that's why I choose this idea of fierce love, but it is love. So rather like Gandhi, when my mother used to smoke cigarettes, and she has a bad chest, it was really hurting her. My father was a doctor. My father said to and treated lung cancer and stuff. My father said to my mother, I've tried to get you to stop. You've promised to stop many times. You have not stopped. So now I'm telling you, I will stop eating until you stop smoking cigarettes. And she laughed at him and said, yes, and for how long? And so he stopped eating. 4 days later, no sign of food. And my father was a person of absolute, if he said it. And my mum suddenly realized, my God, he really means it. He's actually, so she said, okay, I'll stop. He said, great, wonderful, I'll have some food. And then she started again, he stopped eating immediately. It was what I would say a kind of fierce love. And she railed at him, she probably banged his chest and stuff, and he just said, I love you, Phil. I will You know, I'm trusting that you love me enough that you will stop smoking rather than... Now, one could call it manipulative or whatever, but that's what he did. And I feel there's something about the notion of fierce love. If I let myself get angry at the level, if I gave myself, I would end up back where I was in that room with the gun. I don't want to hate people. I don't want to bang heads with people. I want the power of the energy of my loving to be channeled in a powerful way through what I do, but for people ultimately to say of me when I'm dead that he was a peaceful man. You know what I mean? So anger for me was a great place to begin, but and I think one of your slides said that it's channeled anger, but then I think in a sense the anger bit gets left behind. Yes, because it's changed. So this strong body, as it were, one of the reasons that it works in the corporate world is that while I'm speaking words like love, and I speak exactly as I have with you, they feel the heat of my love and everything, but they see my feet are on the ground. They trust. So I mentioned Anita Roddick to a couple of you. Anita Roddick was the founder of the Body Shop, and the Body Shop in its day was an amazing organization championing social justice, human rights, and the environment. Absolutely amazing. But I went to watch Anita once speak to 300 bankers and people in the City of London, and she was clearly angry, and her anger overtook her talk. And I watched 300 people who were ready to listen to her, and some of them were open to changing, end up just saying, we don't want anything to do with you, because they felt assaulted. So this is the only way in which I have some things, but...
Well, you see, that's the conflation of the energy with how you're acting in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
But
can have long discussions about this.
what you just said, absolutely, yes. And in the end, it's energy, isn't it? And we need energy. Those Native Americans once sent to me, because I was expressing some view on something, they said, oh, Mac, you're all love, peace, and whatever. I said, but there's no energy. They said, you need energy, you know. We need our peace chiefs to be people of profound energy. I also find it really helpful to have ideas thrown around which do not immediately completely tie in with my own. So I was rapt this morning listening. I found it really helpful. And so that's what I meant when I said I'm going away with some things, because it's really good. Yeah.
Think it through as well.
That's right. And it's lovely, you know, you hear, oh, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Well, I better think about that. And, you know, so it's just great. And language is language as well. What really matters is how we bring ourselves forward. You know, which is why I've always thought as someone as a speaker, you know, it's lovely, you know, you speak and maybe what you say sounds good and people clap. But what really matters is who is it who then walks out through the back door onto the street when no one's watching? Who is it? Who are you now? You know, who is that person when they go to the restaurant and order a meal? How do they treat the person that brings their food? Who is that person when they get home with the family? These things really matter. So I've said enough, otherwise I'll keep rattling on. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.